Hello, I'm Brooks Rayford, President and CEO of NC Tech, and welcome to this edition of NC Tech Chats, where I have brief discussions with interesting people doing interesting things. NC Tech is a statewide organization with 600 member companies, organizations, and institutions. And in recent years, an issue of strong interest in the tech sector and society generally has been around an increased focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the leaders NC Tech has featured and partnered with is my guest today, John Samuel. John has a new book out, which we'll get to shortly. But first, John, welcome, and let's talk about Ablr, the company that you co-founded and which recently won the 2022 NC Tech Award for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Tech. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
Well deserved. How did the partnership between LCI Technologies and Walk West lead to Ablr's formation? Tell us that story.
Yeah, no, I appreciate this opportunity, Brooks, and thank you so much to NC Tech for this award that we're so grateful for. But this partnership between LCI and Walk West actually started when I just started LCI. I had launched this organization called LCI Tech, and I was going to all these tech conferences because I was trying to create a tech business that would create upward mobility for people who were blind. And I initially thought digital accessibility was going to be the way we were going to do this. And that meant removing the digital barriers that have been hindering a lot of people who are blind. And I thought I needed to get in touch with the tech community. And I was attending a tech conference in Durham. And I remember sitting in the stands and hearing this gentleman named Donald Thompson speaking. And he was talking about the business case for DEI in tech. And when I was listening to him, he sounded just like me, talking about the business case for inclusion. And he offered to meet anyone for coffee afterwards. And I jumped at the opportunity and I met with DT and we had this conversation. And he admitted to me, he's like, I never thought about people with disabilities in tech. And I didn't think about people with disabilities in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we agreed to stay in touch, and he introduced me to Mike Iannelli, who became my co-founder, and we decided that we were going to create something together, and that's what was the formation of Ablr.
Well, that's terrific. And prior to that, and your association with LCI, you had a career that has really spanned the globe. Tell us the brief professional history of John Samuel.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this brief because my journey really, started internationally. Growing up in North Carolina, but starting my career in India was just kind of shock to the system because even though I'm of Indian descent, moving to India and starting my career was culturally really difficult. But I spent a couple of years there working for a tech firm in their corporate finance department, and then moved back to the U.S. to New York City, where I was working for the city of New York, providing financial education during the recession in 2008, 2009. When I was looking around, my friends and my colleagues, they were moving up in their careers. They're going to grad school, or they were moving up in hedge funds, law firms, and I was working for the city and living paycheck to paycheck, and I just didn't see the same type of career trajectory. And so I realized I needed to do something different. And I got reached out by this guy named Steve Clements, who worked for a cell phone tower manufacturing company. And I had worked with him in India, and he was on the board of this cell phone tower company, and they wanted to open up operations in Cameroon, which is in West Central Africa. And when I heard about this, I jumped at the opportunity, and I said, send me out there. I can do this. And he took a chance on me, and I took a $20,000 investment, left Manhattan, moved to Douala, Cameroon, and started this company. And a $20,000 investment turned into $12 million in revenue, $2.4 million in profit in the first 14 months of operations, and spread that across the continent of Africa. And by the time I left in 3 years, we had operations in 8 countries and sales in 22. And I felt like I had accomplished my goal of becoming professionally successful, and decided to go to business school, where I did my MBA at George Washington University in DC. And afterwards, I joined a fintech startup where we were raising capital for emerging market companies, like startups in Africa, which was so cool. But that didn't last forever. Startups, they struggle. It's tough. And so after 3 years, we failed, and And that led me to open up a door for me to join LCI and launch LCI Tech, which is now Ablr.
That's quite a path.
All around the
Journey.
world. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, speaking of journeys, let's now turn more to the personal journey. Early in your life, a rare eye disease began to gradually affect your vision, eventually leading you to become legally blind. And maybe you can explain to our viewers what that term even really means.
Yeah.
How did that affect the trajectory of your career?
Yeah. So kind of starting off with what is this degenerating eye condition? I had something called retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short. And it affected my rods and cones in my eyes. And so I started losing first my night vision, and then kind of typically it's your peripheral vision to your tunnel, but mine was kind of started in this donut and started impacting my central vision as well. And, I was in college when I was diagnosed, and it was devastating because as a young person, the first things that go through your mind are, what girl wants to be the guy who can't see? And what kind of job can I have if I'm blind? And where can I live if I can't drive? And especially not in Raleigh. And that's what really kind of triggered me to move out to India and start my career rather than starting it here in the US and in North Carolina. But legally blind has it's a spectrum. And so, once your eyesight gets to a point of like 2400, you're technically blind. And and so mine is in that range and much further, 22,000. And so it really did impact me. It impacted every decision of my life, from starting my career in India to moving to New York City where they have public transportation, to taking even greater risks and going to Africa because I didn't think I'd have those opportunities here in the US. And um, and that's why I moved out there. And now that's why I really it drives me in my actions and what we do in our business is to make sure that people who are losing their sight or are going through other disabilities in their lives or other conditions, and that they don't have to go all the way to Africa to find success.
As I recall, I don't know whether it was the India example or the Africa example, where you mentioned that the ability to hire a driver very inexpensively was hugely important as part of that decision.
Both places, that the attainability of a car and driver is something unfathomable here. This is pre-Uber days, and now I got with my Ubers, I have a different car every day, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, you become a leader in promoting the removal of barriers to people with disabilities. You touched on your conversation early on with Donald Thompson and his observation that many of us probably overlook people with disabilities as being part of the DEI conversation, or at least historically have. In fact, you were the keynote speaker at our leadership summit, NC Tech Leadership Summit in 2022, and spoke very eloquently about ways in which we all can be more inclusive in our digital presence and communication. So as you did with that audience, maybe share a few examples of how our viewers can personally take steps along these lines.
Yeah, no, that was such a great event. So if anyone hasn't been, I highly recommend heading over to that leadership conference because that was just wonderful experience, great folks, and great conversations. But one of the things that I did when I was up on stage was I took the opportunity to introduce how individuals can actually act on accessibility in their daily lives, and that was through social media. So I got up on stage and I showed people. I said, take a picture of me, and I showed individuals. I walked through them in terms of adding alternative text to their social media posts. And people use social media on a regular basis. We're taking pictures, we're posting them, we're taking videos. And when you think about those pictures, people like myself who use screen readers, that's a technology that reads what's on the screen. When it comes to images, often they will just say JPEG 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It doesn't tell me the context of what the image is. But on social media, you can add alternative text, whether it be Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. You can add this alternative text and describe the image to me. And so when my screen reader comes across it, I can read it. And that's the example we used at the conference. And folks were taking pictures and we did that. That's just one way that everybody and anybody can actually implement accessibility in their daily lives. But when we start to think about companies and organizations, one of the first things, our websites are a foyer to and lobby to companies, right? This is the first impression that individuals and people come to our company. That's the first thing they see. And if that's not accessible, you're really going to turn off and turn down a lot of people who may be really interested in learning more about your business. So making sure that your websites are accessible is another big one. And then finally, making sure that your online applications are accessible, making sure that people are able to apply for jobs, because you may be wondering, oh, we don't have people with disabilities in our company or applying. But maybe the reason is because your online application just isn't accessible. And so to combat that is to actually have people and organizations like Ablr or individuals go through and provide feedback and take action on those changes.
I believe we worked with you in the past year or two to offer some of our member companies the opportunity to have sort of an audit of their site or their main homepage. What does that really look like when you're helping a client review their own digital presence? What kinds of things are you looking for beyond the ones you mentioned about certain applications and other things being better, make them easier to read, understand, and view in their own way?
Exactly. So, what we do, it was such a great contest we did to get individuals within NC Tech to get tested. But what we do is we go through each website, each page, and go through actually user workflows. So, if somebody comes to your website, they're going to want a contact form. Let's go through that whole workflow and let's look at how accessible that is. And what that means is through the web content accessibility guidelines, there's a certain amount of criteria that you need to check for. And you need to make sure the content's perceivable, it's operable, understandable, and robust for all people. That means people using screen readers. That means people who may be deaf or hard of hearing, who can't hear, and individuals who have a cognitive disability, who may not be able to, who have dyslexia, who may not be able to read in using certain text, or even having mobility disability using mouth sticks. So what we do is we go through and check off these criteria on each site to make sure that that we're compliant with those, and we give recommendations on how to remediate them. And so it really goes back to not just checking the box, because we actually use people with disabilities to do this testing. So not only are you making sure that it's compliant, we're also making sure that it's actually usable for people. And that's really, that's taken it to the next step.
That's great. That's great. And I bet a lot of folks aren't aware this is even available. So it's great to get the word out a bit.
Yeah.
So let's spend the time we have left, move on to the book. You published a new book just recently entitled "Don't Ask the Blind Guy for Directions." Tell us about the focus of the book and what you hope it achieves.
Yeah, it took me a few years to write this book, and it was something I've been really thinking about and working on, because when I started to talk about my disability openly, I saw the impact that it made, because I kept this a secret for nearly 17 years before I joined LCI. And I kept it a secret because I didn't want people to know. I kept it bottled up because I was ashamed and embarrassed. But the moment I was able to openly talk about it, people really could embrace it. They could connect with it. They could relate to it. And it really kind of tied in with the whole inclusion, because the reason I wasn't talking about it was that I didn't want to feel like an outsider. I wanted to feel like I included. And the impact, NC Tech was gracious enough to including me on multiple speaking engagement, highlighting me and allowing me to share my story on a larger platform. And I knew I was able to touch a lot of people through that. And also, in addition to LinkedIn, where I've been able to, pass along information, these were great ways. But not only do people get information from those sources, they also read it. And when I was writing the book, I was able to provide a little bit more context about the story. It's not just the highlights that I talk about. You really get to understand the challenges that, that people with disabilities are facing. And, and we all want love. We all want confidence, and we all want to feel like we belong. And I try to share my story because I hope this is a way that we can use proximity builds empathy. That kind of proximity to me through my story, I hope it builds a new level of empathy for people with disabilities and those without.
Well, that's really, really interesting background and backstory to the story. Tell us where people can find the book. It was published, I believe, just this past month.
That's correct. It was just published in November, and you can get it on Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com. Don't ask the blind guy for directions, or you can also go to johngsamuel.com. It's johngsamuel.com, and you can learn more about it. And of course, you can head over to Ablr, ablr360.com, and you can also find out more about the book there as well.
That sounds good. Thank you very much. Well, John, it's been great to chat with you. Thanks for taking time to visit with us. Congratulations on the growth, impact, and trajectory of Ablr. And for our viewers, you can find previous editions of NC Tech Chats and other programming on our YouTube channel, which can be found on our website, nctech.org. Thanks for joining us.